if you had $100 million and you're the Utah Warriors, how would you spend that?
We'd get every kid in the state of Utah rugby ball.
Welcome to the Know Your Ship podcast, presented by eHub. I'm your host, Frank Dolce. Do you think you're ready? Because I don't know.
Are you going to be throwing curveballs at me? Or?
Yes.
All right.
There's definitely going to be curveballs, which you can't handle because you didn't play baseball. Did you play baseball growing up?
1 year.
Were you, just 1 year?
1 year when I was 12 years old. And it was not enough physical contact. And I was like, no, I'm not going to sit out here and do this. Couldn't stand it. Couldn't stand sitting in the outfield. And all the, having to shift from batting to field to this to that. It wasn't my cup of tea.
Nothing about it. The great American
I love going to baseball games. Don't get me wrong. Like we used to go to the Bees games, Buzz, whatever they have been over the number of years. Love it. My dad used to actually have season tickets, I think when they were the Trappers.
Oh, that's a long time ago.
Yeah. Love going to baseball games. Love going, I took my son last year to a Red Sox game. Like, there's just something about baseball that's special, right? Going to a good...
Yeah. There's nothing like it. Sitting in the stands, summer afternoon.
I get the allure of it.
Yeah.
But as the player, maybe it was my ADD, maybe it was just whatever it was. I needed to be physical. I needed to get involved with something a little bit more.
Is that a self-diagnosis? ADD?
That's the best. Yeah. I mean, I haven't gone to any doctors or psychologists for it, but I didn't
like Utah's own Rain Man.
I couldn't really figure out why I just would start getting absolutely bored out of my mind sitting in the outfield.
Oh,
so
that's great. Well, very special guest today here at the Stealth. His very brief baseball career.
Ironically, I was part of the All-Star team for the 12-year-olds.
1 year, you were
1 year.
All-Star.
I was a 1 year All-Star. I got the All-Star hat. I don't know where it is. I can't prove it, but I'll take it.
So, do you think you made the right choice? I mean, you were a 1 year All-Star, one hit wonder in baseball, and you quit.
Literally,
that was quit on top.
Literally one hit wonder. Because when they did the tryouts back in the day, they'd have somebody sitting there at home base just tossing up the ball like this, and I was cranking them over the fence. But when it actually came to actual live pitchers and stuff, terrible.
Yeah,
couldn't figure it out. Didn't know what to do. Yeah, wasn't really my cup of tea.
Yeah, they say it's just one of the hardest things to do. Stand up there.
It probably
the guy
is. Someone's throwing a
90 miles an hour fastball and then a curveball and some changeup or something else. And
my frame of reference is Dude Perfect and what those guys have done with baseball. So that's really all I've got at this stage is whether or not I could be a 40-something-year-old guy trying to swing, hit a professional Major League Baseball pitcher.
Yeah, well, or you could be the guy. What was that story? The guy who went and joined the league when he was like 40 years old and he discovered he was a great
pitcher.
Yeah. Do you remember that one?
Yeah.
I don't know, but that didn't last super long. Anyway, this is Kimball Kjar, co-founder, CEO of the Utah Warriors, part of U.S. Major League Rugby. Did you also co-found the league? Were you instrumental in founding the league?
That seems strong to say that, but we were definitely a part of the core group of individuals that was a part of it. I mean, we started with 7 teams, and it sort of started with 3 or 4 different city, ownership groups, and then we began to kind of bring in others, and so yeah, we were there from like the first meeting in day one, going back to, the fall of 2016 when we began to have these conversations. The first meeting officially was like in Houston in August in 2016, where like 10 or 11 teams and ownership groups came together. And then eventually that led to the founding 7 teams in 2018. So yeah, we've been involved from day one, but, it's all a partnership, so it's multiple different organizations.
Okay, well, we want to talk about that. I want to talk about the business structure of of MLR and how that came to be, because it's following on the heels of a league that only lasted 1 year, I think.
Yep.
That went under. It just didn't.
Yep.
It just couldn't survive under the organization. So I want to get to that. Yep. But let's dig into your background first a little bit and how you got involved in rugby and your love of the sport. And you mentioned it already. Yeah, I went to the game.
Yeah, let's not bring up the result last night.
No, it was a great game. But here's what I thought. You like, for someone who's not at all aware. I mean, I know rugby and I've seen stuff here and there, and we have mutual friends who've played and coached, but I've never, I haven't really gone to a game, and I've never really been up close and personal at a game. I had that opportunity recently. One thing that you notice immediately is the mass of the human beings who are participating in this sport.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
The size and the athleticism and everything that occurs in that. You just don't get that perspective unless you're standing on the sideline.
I mean, I'm biased, but yeah, like it's the full package of athleticism, fitness, strength, power. I mean, every sport I appreciate. I grew up playing football, played a little soccer, played some baseball.
You were a wrestler.
All sports have something amazing about them, but rugby is kind of that unique combination of all of them, where you could be like one of the kids that ended up playing the last couple of minutes of the game is 5'9", maybe 165 pounds soaking wet. This kid from New Zealand who's an unbelievable little scrum half, which is the position I used to play. All the way up to, Gavin Thornberry. He didn't play last night because he's injured, but he's 6'8", 270 some odd pounds, and he's having to run around for a full 80 minutes. And, to be able to do that, but then to do scrums and lineouts, and then the physical contact, tackling, running, it's pretty impressive. Some of the G forces that these guys exert on the day, especially like if you're a small little guy, like I used to be. I'm not that anymore, but like a small little guy having to tackle one of these big, massive props. That's, we've got one of them, Tonga Kofe, who's an American football convert that played a little rugby when he was in high school, but he's 6'3", a sturdy 290, 300 pounds. And when that guy gets a head of steam, I wouldn't want to be standing anywhere near him. So yeah, it's pretty impressive what some of these guys can do. Yeah,
well, it's even more impressive that and I don't know all the positions, but like when you're on the defensive set, there's a couple guys that are back deep, and they're kind of tracking side to side, and they're the smaller guys. What position?
Those are back. So it's kind of it's very similar to the best comparison is football.
Yeah,
where your linemen are forwards, and then your skill positions, your receivers, quarterbacks, running backs are your backs. So in rugby, there's backs and forwards effectively.
Yeah. So your defensive line would be up close to the ball.
And your bigger guys would be kind of closer to the breakdown, to the tackle, and then your speedier, smaller guys would be on the edge.
And it happens that way, as you go out to the wings and the ball is traveling down the line, and it gets to the guy out on the wing, and he's like super fast, good, like really good athleticism, movement, and all that. Well, what happens also is that one of the guys you were talking, like, the 6'8", 300-pound guy, he gets the ball. Well, he's going to turn upfield. Like, he's going to just start running with the ball, and sometimes he breaks through, and then one of the backs finds himself in a position where he has to go and hit
chase that guy down. Yeah, it's almost like you just got to jump on his back and just hopefully hang on for a ride.
Yeah.
Grab him. Slide down to it's like a cornerback coming out to try to tackle a big tight end. Or a big running back.
with no padding.
Yeah.
It was a fascinating experience. It was a great experience to watch that. And I think, like you have said in the past, if you can witness, if you can get people to witness the sport up close and personal, it changes your perspective on what is happening out on the field and all of the athleticism. So it was a lot of fun. I am curious about. I know a little bit about your history and how you got into rugby, because you jumped in late in your life, and then you really made the most of it. I think you were 3-time All-American, is that right?
Something like
several-time national champion, coached several national championship teams. Was rugby just not a thing when you were growing up? I mean, was it all the other sports that kind of took its place until you discovered it?
Kind of. So rugby here in Utah actually is got a pretty good seedbed of. It's multi-generational, not only because of the Polynesian community, but because of a lot of the folks that have come from rugby playing countries. But when I was growing up, this was the 90s, late 80s. Highland Rugby was a pretty well established program. The Larry Gelwickses of the world. Morgan Scally he's a year younger than me, and he had done really well with Highland Rugby and football. Haloti Nada kind of came up through that same Highland Rugby program. Fui Vakapuna, Cameron Jensen. There's a lot of guys that played football, kind of through that 90s and 2000s time frame that also played rugby and have Highland Rugby to kind of thank for that. But when I was in high school, I grew up in Davis County. I grew up in Bountiful. We relocated here when I was about 7, so I'm kind of a Utah born and bred kid, but grew up in Bountiful. And there was also another club up in Davis at Davis High. And I had a buddy of mine that was playing rugby. He said, "Oh, you should come out and play. You should come out and play." Actually, one of my teachers at the school, his son played. But it was in the spring, kind of in that time frame of, March, April, and May, when I was also doing other wrestling stuff. I was doing freestyle and Greco.
Gotcha.
So wrestling was kind of my sport of choice. So I never really did rugby. But then when I got to BYU, I was going down there initially to wrestle. And then I decided, I can't do wrestling at the collegiate level. I'm not that. I like it, but I'm not that passionate. Like to wrestle at the collegiate level.
That's a commitment.
You've got to either be completely committed to it or have a couple screws loose. Like you can't be anywhere in between. Like, honestly. I say that with all due respect. My cousin Ben, he was an All-American down at UVU. Like, our family grew up wrestling. My dad wrestled at BYU. My uncle wrestled at BYU. So wrestling's kind of a part of our family DNA. Anyways, I made that decision really late to not wrestle. So I'm sitting there trying to figure out, well, I can't go try out for the football team. There's no way that they're going to take a 5'9" slow piece of crud, to play football, let alone, they're not going to even look at me for walk on or anything. So, anyways, my roommate, all of his brothers had played rugby at BYU, and BYU at the time had a pretty decent program. They said, "You should go try out." I was like, "Yeah, sure. Why not?" I've always kind of wanted to. I've been invited to do it all these other times for this other club up in Davis County and yada, yada, yada. Anyways, I didn't know what was going on, didn't know the rules, went out to one of the practices, which was sort of the de facto tryout. And only because of the fact that I was just in such good shape from wrestling did I make the team. And I could run sideline to sideline for 80 minutes long. And my wrestling shape just kind of made it so it was an easy transition. And I loved it because, growing up in kind of that American football context, I don't know if you know Larry Wall. He was our high school. He was my high school coach. Amazing guy. But we ran the old Nebraska I, and I was a receiver. So you're out there mostly for blocking.
Just a blocker.
I think
many passes.
I think I caught maybe 6 or 7 passes my entire career. So the fact that I could get 6 or 7 passes in a game I could run with the ball. I could tackle the ball. I could do anything and everything that, you kind of couldn't do in football. I just took to it like a duck in water.
Did you grow up in a big family?
5 kids. I'm in the middle.
And would you say, was it a competitive athletic situation with the family? You mentioned your grandfather, your dad, wrestlers. Maybe you trended towards that, or was it different? You were the one who just kind of
no, it was kind of me falling into it. Candidly, I just wanted to do. You'll kind of appreciate this. BYU, you're either you're on one of the sports teams or you're doing intramurals. And in the intramurals down there, you're saying a prayer with the team beforehand. I was like, not for me. No. I want to play something competitive. I wanted to represent BYU. I grew up a big BYU fan. My grandparents, my grandfather was part of KSL Bonneville Communications and helped set up that relationship back in the 60s, when BYU was trash. And so they were Utah. They went to Utah and they converted, as part of that. So they were big BYU fans through the 70s and 80s and all the Lavelle era stuff. So we dove in naturally. So I was a big kind of BYU knucklehead, and I just wanted to play for BYU, do something for BYU, and be a part of that wasn't saying a prayer and doing intramurals with the opposing team before the game.
You like more of a competitive.
Yeah. I just wanted to compete. I wanted to have fun.
Did you naturally, we talked about a little bit about your aversion to baseball, like standing around in the outfield there wasn't enough contact.
Yeah.
Did you have a natural affinity toward contact, toward physical type of?
Yeah. I was always getting more fouls than points in basketball. It's like anytime the elders quorum, basketball stuff comes up, I have
which
to
is,
ask.
by the way, the worst. Like ward ball, and for people who are listening who don't understand what ward ball is in the LDS church, like ward ball is the worst.
Well, my first question always is like, are the fouls still 5? Is that the number still? Has it gone up? Have we decided that it's now 10? Because if it's 10, then I'm good for 10 fouls.
If it's 5 fouls, you're maybe making it through the first period of play.
Maybe. And, listen, like we've got, like in our ward, we've got Jimmy Balderson. We've got all these guys that play Division I basketball. And so, you got 6'6" out there on the court and little hobbit down over here.
There's only one way to manage that.
Yeah, I've got to just let them know, who's in charge.
Yeah, that's right.
So I didn't really take well to basketball. I loved it. Played junior jazz, did all that sort of stuff, but never really, took to it like other guys. Football, I loved. Wrestling, I grew to appreciate and love over time. Hated it at first because I was terrible at it. But all of those physical contact sports, for whatever reason, I gravitated towards.
Yeah, you enjoyed that. You didn't shy away from the contact. And so your roommate says, "Hey, go try out for the rugby team. You make it. You're physically fit. You don't understand the sport, but you grow into it." And then would you say is that where you developed your passion for this sport?
Where it started there. I got called on an LDS mission to Brisbane, Australia. And then
a highly regarded rugby
country.
Yeah.
They've got 2 versions of rugby. They love rugby so much. They've got regular rugby, which is what we play, but then rugby league.
Is that Australian rules?
No, Australian rules. Everybody gets
That's different?
Yeah. Aussie rules is a cool sport once you get to understand it, but it's completely different as well. So they've got.
Okay, so you said there's 2 versions of rugby.
So there's rugby. In rugby circles, we call it rugby union because it's the original version of rugby. The reason they call it union is because these groups were called unions, and so that's kind of they're the ones that codified the rules. Blah 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 blah.
Okay.
So that was the original parent sport of American football, rugby league, and some other things.
Okay.
That's what we play in the Warriors, and that's what I played at BYU. There's rugby league that is it takes out some of the like the scrums and the lineouts of rugby union to be able to just speed it up and get the game going. It's basically just tackle.
So the ball is instead of getting in the scrum.
The scrum, when the scrum gets replayed, it's basically just they put it in and they're uncontested scrums, and then when you get tackled in rugby league, there's not what they call a ruck where there's a contest of the ball.
Yeah.
In rugby league, it's kind of like football. It's actually a little bit similar, sort of like a combination of rugby and American football, where you have like 5 downs, 5 possessions, 5 tackles to be able to get X number of meters. And if you don't, then you kick it back and then the other team goes, but it's constant action. And in Australia, rugby league is very, very big. They have what they call the National Rugby League. In fact, they came over to Las Vegas and they've played 2 years in a row now where they play their opening weekend series in Las Vegas. It's actually a fun sport once you get to understand it and appreciate it. Aussie Rules is completely different. It's based off of Gaelic football from Ireland. It's played on a big old cricket pitch. It's got like 12 million human beings on this field. It's like 20 on 20. It's massive. But once you understand that, it's also pretty fun to watch. But everybody kind of confuses Aussie Rules with rugby.
You get all of those things misidentified if you're not familiar with it. And so is that now is the Australian rules is that the one where they can line up for a kick?
Yeah, so they're kicking it between those 4 posts, and then you got the guy that comes out and white. Yeah. I don't know, who thought that was the coolest, symbol of you scored the best points.
I don't know, but people do it now.
Yeah. But
all the time.
It looks like he's like doing Shooter McGavin or something. But yeah, I went over to Australia. I served in Brisbane, and we just played touch rugby every day or every P day. And just began to, once you're in a country that actually appreciates and loves the sport, it kind of takes on a whole new level of context, right?
Sure.
You can understand how it can impact a community. You can understand how it can unite a community. Whereas before I just had fallen kind of in love with the sport and the contact and, the competitiveness. But once you understand how deep a sport can really impact people's lives, and that's what I learned in Australia, is that rugby has a very significant power for good. So that's when I fell in love with it, like just head over heels, came back, and then played with the U.S. national team from 2001 till about 2007. So
came back, played with the national team. So you didn't go back to BYU.
I went back to BYU.
Did you and played at BYU?
Started playing at BYU.
Yeah.
And then we went and played. We played Cal, who was the big team of at the time.
Yeah.
They were in charge. Their head coach and their assistant coach were the 2 guys that were in charge of the U.S. national team at the time. I played against them and got picked up with the national team on top of my stuff with BYU.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, so in that time you finished at BYU playing with the national team for 6 years?
Yeah.
And when you're playing with the national team, are you earning a living?
No. It's at that time it was still very much an amateur-based sport. I mean, you're paid a per diem per day. They take care of your travel. They take care of your, your stuff, but it's like, it's peanuts.
Well, what kind of time commitment is that? You're playing with the national team. I mean,
and that's where, I started to get into sales and,
just
executives. Yeah. I'm kind of your typical BYU story where I got married when I was 22. We had a baby, the year that I graduated, so I had a family by the time I left BYU, and I needed to provide, I couldn't do what most of these other rugby guys were doing with the national team, which is basically couch surf, go over to France or England or New Zealand and just try to find a club that you could play either semi-professional or professional rugby for. That's not something that I could do with a wife and a kid, right? So that's where I connected with my good friend Justin Nadald. He and I had worked together on some other things. He was a former rugby guy at BYU as well. So I started actually working for him doing talent acquisition, executive search in the high tech space. And that was my job. But his deal with me was always, listen, if you're making deals, I don't care what you do. You can do it from wherever. This was kind of before all the remote, working stuff. But yeah. And fortunately for me, I just figured it out. Sales is one of those deals where you get out what you put in effectively. And, it's all about relationships. And over time, it got to the point where I could leave for weeks, and in some cases, like for a month or two, and still manage my business the way that I needed to. And, I had to rely on some other folks, occasionally. And it was a big support in Justin, some of our other business partners, with, the businesses that we were doing. Had to rely on those guys quite a bit as well, but they knew what it was that I was trying to do. And we all agreed to it up front that as long as I was pulling my weight and I wasn't shirking my duties, then, we could make it work.
Yeah. You found yourself in a nice situation because you were working with people who were sympathetic to rugby.
It was, and that's pretty rare. I have to acknowledge that, right? Like I couldn't go to, I had tried to, and talked to a couple other companies and, it just wasn't going to work. But, I consider myself pretty lucky that during those, 03 to 07, 08, was some pretty significant life changes. We added another child. Rugby was still a part of our life. But yeah, no, it led to some other things and eventually led to me coaching and doing some other things as well.
So what was your goal with rugby? Were you trying to connect with a professional league somewhere? Were you trying to make that your full-time career, or were you just passionate about the sport and you wanted to continue to play?
Bit of both. I wanted to see how far I could take it because in my position, especially in rugby, playing scrum half, it's kind of like you're one piece of the quarterback. The quarterback of the rugby team is kind of the fly half, but you can't really do it without the scrum half. The fly half's the number 10, the guy that you were mentioning, earlier. He's the guy that kind of makes the decisions and the calls and distributes the ball and, manages everything. But you can't do that without a good scrum half. And to be an American scrum half, born and raised, to be able to take on that challenge of representing the U.S., I wanted to go to a World Cup, and I wanted to be a regular starter. I wanted to see if I could break the mold that historically had been the norm up to that point, where there was never an American that could play scrum half because it was a very nuanced position, and you had to kind of be raised, born and bred, in the rugby culture and blah 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 blah. So I was trying to kind of buck that norm and see if I could break into a professional team and a professional club. And, but I wanted to try to go as far and as high as I possibly could. So.
Gotcha. And at that point, the professional clubs were outside of the United States?
Yeah. UK, Ireland, France were the main ones, and then Southern Hemisphere.
And that's, although there is now a professional league in the United States, that's still the case.
Yeah.
Overseas, rugby is significant.
Yeah. France is typically regarded as the most commercially successful league in the world. Top 14. Yeah. It's kind of, people don't really.
Wait, but nobody says I don't even know what the team in France is, what the teams in France are called. Everybody says, like, I may be getting this totally wrong.
Yeah.
And if I do, we can edit it all out.
Yeah.
But everybody thinks of, like, the New Zealand All Blacks. Like,
so that's the national team, right?
That's their national team, but that's where I associate rugby with. It's like New Zealand and Australia.
Well, so, pound for pound, New Zealand has always been and always will be the most successful rugby country in the world. They've got like 5 million people. They support 5 professional rugby teams. They also support 1 professional rugby league team. And then they've got the All Blacks. And then they've got another kind of second tier minor league called the National Provincial Championship, the NPC. I mean, rugby, you're given a rugby ball when you're born in the hospital over there, right? Like it's just how it is.
It's your gift.
Yeah. Yeah. You don't get diapers. You get a rugby ball. Just go pee out in the woods or something. But Australia's kind of similar. Rugby isn't as actually, cricket and Aussie rules is a little bit bigger over there. Rugby league and rugby union are also big, but they've also got professional baseball in Australia. They've got professional basketball.
And yeah.
But in France, in the south part of France, like rugby is God. Like it is the culture, it is the religion, it is everything. Soccer's big. And it always has been, always will be. But rugby is the culture of
that dominates
community, businesses. Like Toulouse, Biarritz, all of Nice, all of these communities rally around their rugby clubs.
Wow, yeah. I never knew. Okay, so you wanted to potentially land in a spot like that
somewhere, yeah.
Okay, well, at some point, your playing career comes to an end, and do you make a conscious decision to stay involved with the sport, or do you go off and say, well, now I have to be a professional individual in something else and make a living?
Yeah, well, I think all of us at some point kind of have to make some of those decisions, whether we wanted to to make them on our own or not. I was dropped at the last minute in 2007 before the team was named for the World Cup. I had gone to the 2003 World Cup, which was a dream come true. Played in a handful of games in the World Cup. And I consider that one of, from a rugby perspective, one of my greatest accomplishments. But in 2007, I'd come back and had some injuries and some other stuff. And I was getting ready to try to get named to the national team for the World Cup. And I was in the rotation, sometimes the starter, sometimes not. And then literally the last roster that they named to travel to France for the 2007 World Cup. Sorry. So not only were you not one of the 3 scrum halves taken, we're dropping you completely. So that was tough, but that forced then some of those life-changing decisions. There's some other personal things that kind of came up around that time that in hindsight, I'm grateful and feel blessed because of it. But it also provided me an opportunity to then say, okay, how do I want to continue to give back? Because this sport, I met my wife through my rugby buddies. My job, my career at the time had come through my association through rugby folk. And a lot of these other people that I met, in other business dealings and whatnot, it kind of came through that. So I was wanting to give back. So yeah, my brother was playing down at BYU at the time, so I wanted to go and just maybe help coach, and that's kind of where I began to dip my toe into the coaching stuff.
Okay, let's leave it right there for a second because I have all these questions about rugby. Yeah. Maybe you can explain why these things occur. One interesting thing, if I have this correct, is I mentioned a number 10. You also mentioned number 10. But 10 is the number is specific to the position. Yeah. So it's not baseball, football, whatever. You don't pick your number. The number is assigned to you based on the position that you play. Is that correct?
That is 100% correct. And it's one of the rugby, the unique things about it. You're actually... in rugby culture, you're considered the caretaker of the jersey when you wear it. The jersey is not yours. It never is yours. You're the caretaker of the jersey. So if you go to a lot of these historically, big clubs or national teams, like in their locker room, you'll have the number 1 jersey locker. And you'll have the names of all the top players that have played that position so that when you sit at that locker, you're like, I'm wearing the same jersey as Karl Hoft and, all of these guys that have come before me. I'm the caretaker for the next 80 minutes of this jersey. I could have it one game. I could have it 100, but I'm the caretaker. So that's kind of it's kind of cool and unique and powerful when you look at it through that lens. But it is sort of the weird things. One of the weird things that American sports fans don't quite understand is that, you know, like Joel Hodgson is our number 10, but some games, like, he hasn't been number 10, he's been number 12 because he's played a different position. We put another guy, you know, just based off of selection, availability, injuries, or whatever. Like, he's not always going to be number 10. So yeah, it's just one of those kind of unique things.
Yeah,
a little bit different.
I like that though. The caretaker of the jersey. That's interesting. Okay. What is the deal when, I mean, I can only relate it to a throw in in soccer, but the ball's out of bounds on the side and one of the players goes and picks up the ball, and then there's this lineup, and then you're picking people up to catch the ball. What is that called?
The line out.
That's called the line out.
The line out.
And are there specific rules related to the line out? Like in terms of how many times you can lift it?
There's a lot of nuance and rules, but effectively what has to happen is that the team throwing in has to throw it in straight. Okay. And so both teams technically can have an opportunity to compete for the line out. Mm-hmm. But the advantage that you have is that, you know, as the attacking team, the team that is throwing it out or throwing the line out, you know where you're going to go. You can kind of decoy. That's why you see a lot of movements and different lifts. And, you know, sometimes it's the front, sometimes it's the back.
Yeah.
So it's all about just, you know, you want to get the ball in play. And sometimes you can use that line out to get the ball in play and do different attacking strategies off the line out. But yeah, I mean, got to go throw it in straight. And there's some other rules about when you can jump and when you can't. But yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. And so it doesn't matter who's in front or who's behind. I mean, it just depends on.
No. Yeah. Like you can't jump early. You can't.
What would be considered an early jump? Does the jump occur at the throw?
Yeah, but like, you know, when they call jump early, you can't I can't fake lift a guy in the front and then throw it to the back. Like, these are some of the finer rules that I think rugby is a little bit archaic on, that, you know, when you sit there and try to explain it to a non-rugby person, it's just kind of like, I get bored even talking about it sometimes, because it's just like, you know, just get the ball in and let's just play rugby.
I hear you. It is kind of an exciting part of the game, though. To see it the way that it's done, like, these guys are going 15 feet in the air. I know.
You know, and it's not only guys that are 50, these are the 6'6", 6'8" guys. Like Gavin Thornbury, our 6'8" lock, they're lifting him, and he's being lifted by another 6'5", 6'6" guy. So the 6'6" guy's lifting him above his head. You know, I can only imagine he's got to be close to 20 feet in the air. I mean, it's insane.
It is.
Yeah, it's fun to watch.
Why, after you score, do you receive the kick?
Oh, that's the one thing that I loved about rugby when I first started playing. I got to tell you, like, when I first started playing rugby, you know, BYU, we were pretty good. Like, we would go and play all these other collegiate teams, and, you know, I was like, hold on a second. We just scored? And we're getting the ball back, and we can go score again?
Yes.
That's what I loved it. That was one of the little small things. I didn't really know all the rules at that point, but I was like, holy shnikes.
Oh, wait, we get the ball
back. We
get
the ball back after we just scored. Yeah, it's just one of those things that I don't know where and what the genesis of that was. But at the professional level, it becomes a little bit different, because now the other teams are better at kicking, and they actually can put a lot of pressure on the kick and some other stuff. So it's not always a gimme that you get the ball back straight away, but you do want to get possession off of what they call the restart. Mm-hmm. And if you get possession, then, you know, it's just like any sport. That's the one thing about rugby, is that it's just like any sport. If you have possession and you manage territory, you're going to win the game. Mm-hmm. That's the way it works.
Well, there's another interesting thing about rugby. I'm hoping this isn't a myth, so don't.
Okay. Is this the curveball?
No, I don't know about the curveball, but maybe we can talk about the curveball at some point.
Okay. I didn't know if you were going to throw me a curveball.
Oh, this is not a curveball. I thought maybe there was a special way, but it is the way that they throw the ball down the line, and you watch these guys. It's a skill that you have to.
Yeah, running forward and throwing a ball backward are very counterintuitive.
Yeah, and there were a couple times in the game the other night that were, and I don't know how the official notices it, but he's blowing the whistle and it's like a forward pass.
Yeah.
Got to go back. Okay. Yeah. No, this is the other tradition that I have read about. Rugby's like ferocious. Like it is such an aggressive sport, and these guys are hitting each other. It's like collision after collision. It's no wonder that people are injured constantly. Yeah. In fact, I would say that there's not one player on the field who isn't suffering some injury at any given moment in time. Like of all the guys on the field, everybody's injured in some way. There's something that they're dealing with.
I actually think that's a fair assessment.
Okay.
Yeah.
So these guys are going after each other.
Yeah.
For, what is it?
80 plus minutes.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. And then there's a tradition about having a meal after the game. The teams together and coaches combined have a meal together.
Yeah. It's just one of those, again, like, so rugby historically started in kind of that blue blood British schoolboy kind of context. It was all about, Churchill made the comment, Winston Churchill made the comment that, soccer is a gentleman's sport played by hooligans, and rugby is a hooligan sport played by gentlemen. and that's the truth.
That's good.
But, that's one thing I've come to appreciate. Like actually some of the I don't want to say the dearest friends, but a lot of the relationships that I've been able to foster over the years are with people that I actually played against. It's just one of those rugby-isms that you get to know and compete against the other person. But then when all is said and done, you'll open up your house to that person. You'll let them in your life in any way, shape, or form you possibly can, because there's a common respect and an understanding of what the sport represents, and that's respect, camaraderie, and whatnot. Yeah, so you get together, and even at the international level, and at the Warriors level, we have a post game. We call it the aftermatch function, and the teams come together, have some meals. The staff come together, have some meals. We have sponsors and partners, and the wives and the kids come in, and we break bread. And the two captains get up. They say the niceties and compliment each other and the team and how the game went. Usually, there's an exchange of like a jersey or even like a tech tee or a polo or something. Hey, that we thought this guy played really well. We kind of commend him for a game well played. That kind of stuff. But it's one of those traditions that I love and appreciate about the sport. Like you'll never actually see a player in rugby yell down a referee ever, and it's not because there's penalties or other things that inherently are part of it. It's just one of the things, you call the referee sir, and it's just a thing of respect. If he shows you the yellow card, you're off the field. You just walk off and you take your dose.
Well, I noticed that there's commentary happening on the field.
Yeah.
And if there's a call that people disagree with, they're making that known. But I think what the point you're making is it's not in a way that's destructive to the referee. They're making an objective observation. This was a bad call, whatever.
Yeah. Like if you were to take a soccer situation where the referee makes a call versus a rugby situation. Yikes. Yeah. Like the referee first, he'll go to the captain. Doesn't matter what happens. He'll get the captain of the team. And then if there's a situation that happened with one of his players, he'll bring the player in, he'll have the conversation to and with the captain. And if there's any questions or concerns, it sometimes does get animated, but when all is said and done, it's like, okay, this is the call, move on with your life.
Yeah.
So you don't ever see people coming up and, yelling and screaming and, 6 or 7 players surrounding the referee and all that sort of stuff.
Well, we could do a whole podcast on the soccer stuff.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's one of the great traditions is the post-match. And, if that could happen, all sporting events would probably be better if that could happen. One of the great things I love about NHL hockey, especially in playoffs, is after every game, they do the lineup and you shake hands. Like you take your gloves off and you shake hands with everyone in the line. I think that's a tremendous way to show sportsmanship.
Yeah.
And this is probably next level.
Yeah, well, like if you think about like in the NBA, it kind of I've actually stopped watching the NBA as much as I used to. I grew up in the Jordan era and all that stuff. I loved watching the NBA, loved it, back in the day. I'm not saying there was more or less respect, but like now, I don't know. Maybe I've just kind of seen through it. But like when the game's over, both teams just leave. They don't talk to each other. They don't shake hands. Like even in the collegiate game, you'll shake hands.
You line up after the game, shake hands. Sure.
But in the NBA, it's like nobody's giving somebody, kudos for the game well played. And, I don't know. Maybe that's just the way that they like to do things, and they've got to get on their private jets and head to the next game, whatever it is. I think sport today needs more of that respect and camaraderie.
I don't disagree at all. And I think the NBA, I mean, I think the product is not as watchable as it used to be.
Yeah.
When we grew up watching the game. Anyway, I love that. I love that about rugby. Okay, so now you have a chance you talked about wanting to give back to the sport that had given so much to you. And by the way, you had given a lot to the sport already, but tell me about the things. What are the things about rugby? What are the lessons that you learned? What are the things that you take into your daily lives and you like to teach your kids and the athletes and the people that you're around that you learned from the sport?
I'd be sounding very cliche if I went down that like hard work, determination,
all the core stuff.
Yeah, like every sport has that. I think that's inherent with, like, even my daughter's dance. Like it's different. I don't get it. I don't like. I go to the recitals. I love watching her perform, but like I don't. That's something I've never really understood. But that's okay. Like she loves it. She's passionate about it. But I want her to do that, to be able to learn a lot of the same lessons that I learned, growing up. Rugby was one of those sports where, I will say the one thing that I appreciated the most about it is that you could be the most physical specimen and not be that good. You could be the least physical specimen and absolutely own and manage the game. And that's very surprising to some people when after you've looked at and watched the game and you said, well, geez, these guys physically are just ginormous. But actually some of the best players that have ever played the game, they might have some athletic abilities, but the ones that can, it really is a game of chess. It's being able to know when to put a kick into different spaces. It's knowing when to make a pass. It's knowing how to get your players to kind of move in certain directions. It's knowing how to rally, guys to do certain things. And, there's no coach on the field. And so it's basically 15 guys, and you've got to try to get all of your pieces in a place to be able to have the greatest and best outcome. And sometimes that takes a very intelligent, smart leader on the field to help you get across that finish line. And I think that's no different in life. I think that's no different in business. But it is genuinely one of those sports that is a game of chess. And if you can have a master, a chess master that's in that 10 jersey or the 9 jersey, or even in some of these other key positions, 9 times out of 10, you're going to win the game. It doesn't matter what sort of physical prowess that's out there.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because the physicality is the first thing that you notice.
Yeah.
And like we said earlier, the size of the individuals who are participating. Now, not everybody. I mean, you talk about some of those, what you call the wings or the backs, or those are people with more average dimensions, still big physical individuals, but there's just a mass of humanity in the middle of the field. And it's interesting that you mentioned the nuance of rugby relative to the physicality, because as I'm watching it, I kept thinking, how does he know that he should pass it there? How does that guy know where he should be at that moment? And there were some times when passes looked like they were going, and they weren't even looking.
Yeah.
It was like they just
kind of knew that it was
where everybody needed to be on the field.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like football, right? You're going to score points when you're able to break through and not have defenders get in your way.
Yeah.
It's that simple, right? And rugby's no different. You got to have the ball, but you want to be able to move the ball in such a way that you're going to get past the defense. Now, there's dozens of ways to get past the defense. You can kick it in behind. You can pass it, into this gap or to the wide gap, or you can keep it tight repeatedly over and over and over again and just wear them down and then eventually move the ball into space. So when you're in a position and, like I was, playing scrum half, it was always sort of that calculus of, how are we doing? And I don't want to say that I got it to that level, but I began to actually figure it out actually better and more as I coached. You learn more about the game when you coach. But, I look back and I think you look at some of the greatest athletes in just about any sport, they're chess masters. Tom Brady, Michael Jordan, you can kind of go down the list. These guys and gals, for whatever sport they had this kind of nuance of understanding the game better than just about anyone, and they could just predict where things needed to go.
Well, the person you're describing to me perfectly is Peyton Manning, who physically, I mean, he was big, but physically, I don't think you could say he wasn't an elite athlete.
Yeah,
maybe, I don't know. He didn't look like an elite athlete. He could barely.
I'd love to see him run a 40 meter.
I don't think he would be fast. I mean, you could probably have a cup of tea while.
Yeah.
And he didn't have elite arm strength, especially at the end of his career. But he won 2 Super Bowls at the end, or 1 Super Bowl at the end of his career, and he knew what was happening.
Yeah.
He knew where he needed to put the ball. He knew where everybody was going to be on the field before it even occurred. He just understood at a different level.
Well, and this kind of probably will speak a little bit more in your wheelhouse. I remember, I was a BYU fan, but I actually remember in 2004, Alex Smith. That was actually watching genius level. He knew that offense, that spread offense, and he could. Again, I think he was a good athlete, don't get me wrong, but he wasn't the starting quarterback for a reason initially. But when they put him in, he figured it out. And it was actually really fun to watch during those Urban Meyer years when they were just absolutely pulling teams apart with that offense because he knew how everything kind of worked across the different layers of that offense versus the defense. It was pretty fun.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think there is absolutely something to that. So, you have a chance to, you have a successful business career. You're kind of coaching and you win several national championships coaching with BYU. But at some point you have this opportunity to get involved with.
Yeah. Man, let's just call a spade a spade. When you're a masochist, you're a masochist.
Look, I just want to know, they said, hey, you know what? We're going to start up this league. You can get involved. It's probably not going to be financially super lucrative.
If you ever want a real good podcast, get my wife on here and she'll tell you the actual story and the craziness of this whole thing. And she'll probably tell you a very different one. But, listen, God bless her and everyone else that stood by us in those early days because, listen, I had always kind of been an entrepreneur, started other businesses, and I liked the challenge of that, building businesses. And it really kind of drew me in. But, when Pro, that was the first league that you kind of mentioned earlier, started in 2016. They got sanctioning for professional rugby here in the United States. It was destined for failure. We met with them. You could tell just from the first meeting, they were destined to just die.
Okay, this is the part I think is going to be really interesting, the business principles that are at work here.
Yeah.
And I know that when you started up the current league, you approached it differently. Okay, so what foundationally, what what were the business concepts? Why do you say that it was destined to fail?
Sports. Okay. So if you take a step back, starting a business is hard. That's business.
No matter what you start.
No matter what you're doing.
Yeah.
It could be a coffee shop. It could be a sign business. It could be eHub. It could be anything. Like you've lived it. You understand it. Like starting a business is hard. But sports and professional sports in particular is so capitally intensive because you're effectively building a brand, but you're building a brand that has to bring in so many other people. Like there's other businesses that you can start out of your garage. You can start out of at
eHub, we work with businesses like that, and people are shipping stuff out of their garage all the time. That's where they start. Yeah.
But with rugby, I need at least 40 people to have a team. I need coaches. I need, it requires, it's a capitally intensive business. And so you add that layer to it. And then that also the next layer is that the American sports entertainment market is the most competitive and lucrative sports entertainment market in the world. Rugby has yet to penetrate that market fully. We're beginning to kind of do that. But at the time, rugby has always viewed America as like the final frontier. If we can make it in America, if you can make it here, you can make it anywhere, that kind of thing. And so they've wanted to get into the American sports ecosystem for decades. And they've always seen, America as they say, the sleeping giant of rugby, blah, blah, blah. So we knew that it was going to take a lot. Anyways, fast forward to 2016, we met with the folks with Pro, and their construct was, a monolithic single owner. And if you look at
single owner of the league,
or all the players, all the teams, just one person, one person, one group, one entity, one, thing. And if you look at the history of professional leagues in America, and you kind of look at it in the context of survivability, there has never been a league, a professional sport that has been owned and operated by a single entity or person that has ever survived, ever. There's not a lot of them, but their strike rate in terms of their success versus failure is pretty definitive. It's like 0-3 or 4. And then there was just some interpersonal stuff. Like it's just, you could tell that this was not going to be a very well organized and situation. The other piece was, on the flip side of that, we began to look at, okay, rugby's going to have to be a challenger sport in this competitive landscape of America. And soccer, I think, is probably the best correlative sport to that, because it's not a core American sport, or at least it wasn't in the 90s and 2000s when Major League Soccer started. So rugby is another challenger sport, and we needed and realized that we had to have a construct business-wise that allowed us to weather challenge and the early challenges of a sport, because it's not going to be perfect, and it's going to take a lot of money, and it has taken a lot of money. But you look at like Major League Soccer. I think that was the best template that we utilized, was Major League Soccer. This is something that they got right. They had, now they were in a bit of a different situation, but their construct was what they call a single entity ownership construct, which was effectively the teams own the league. If you look at the NFL, the NBA, and even the NHL to some degree, the teams don't own the league. You're a franchisee. You're like the McDonald's operator of the McDonald's franchise. You're given the right to operate, but the league itself sets the standards, the practices, the protocols, all the things that you need to do, and you need to be beholden to that as the franchisee. And there's obviously a lot more detail there, but for all intents and purposes, the teams don't necessarily own the league. They have a say. They're owners, but they don't own the league. MLS was the first group that effectively brought in the single entity ownership. They own the league, and then The second thing that we modeled off of them, which is very different at the time, was to have all the players centrally contracted so that you're decreasing overhead and other administrative costs that can become very, problematic over time. So, workers' compensation, all that sort of stuff. Anyways, all the minutia of HR.
So is that not managed at the team
No.
level? That's managed
At the league level.
Gotcha.
You're allocated the players, but the teams, as part of that though, then the teams basically fund the league and the payments to the players and other administrative costs like travel, central office, et cetera, et cetera.
Gotcha.
It's very similar in other leagues to some degree. There's kind of, different things like that across the board. MLS, again, is probably the most correlative and the one that probably compares the closest. They've since evolved as they've gotten bigger and stronger. But, you go back and you look at their first 10 years and, our first 10 years, we're in year 8. They started with 12 teams. They expanded, they contracted, they had early struggles. There was a point in time in 2002 that no one was going to broadcast the Soccer World Cup in the United States. And no one really knew if Major League Soccer was actually going to survive. And one of the genius strokes that they did was that MLS created Soccer United Marketing that then bought the exclusive North American distribution rights to the Soccer World Cup. Anyways, long story short, it put them kind of in this moment of inflection where they began to really control the media, the landscape, the growth of the league. And then you had Real Salt Lake come into play in 2004, 2005. And you can actually look back. Real Salt Lake is the inflection point of Major League Soccer. That was actually one of the first true expansion teams that paid a premium fee to be a part of Major League Soccer. Up until that point, Major League Soccer had been owned by 4 billionaires, had 10 teams. One of them was owned by one owner owned like 6 teams. So it was largely being underwritten by 4 individuals. But you look at what we were trying to go with in a challenger context. You needed to have, I think the best metaphor is that the table is the league. Your legs of the table are your respective owners of each team. If one of the teams begins to falter and have issues financially or otherwise, the legs of the other members of the table can keep everything held up. Gotcha. Whereas if you had a single, monolithic entity, you saw it with the AAFL. That was actually a perfect example. They had one owner. He began to see the rising costs on this and not really an end in sight. And that's when the plug got pulled fast and quick.
Yeah, immediate.
Yeah. So we've been able to weather a lot of storms because of that structure. COVID, we've had contraction, we've had expansion, we've had the ups and the downs that you're going to get with any challenger startup league. And we kind of knew that was going to be the case to get us through this infancy and now sort of this teenage phase of where we're at.
Yeah. So would you, you're what, 8 years? 8 years in. Okay. So you're still you could kind of say you're still in that startup phase a little bit, but I only have 2 more questions for you. I know, and I appreciate, thank you so much for all of your time and for all of
I've enjoyed it.
All of your insight. It's really fascinating. I wish I could go down my list of questions so I learn more about rugby. In fact, maybe you guys could produce some videos like your short minute, like, hey, this is what a line out is, and do your videos. So people like me can understand.
Just like this?
Yes, just like that. So, the little robots.
Yeah.
I'd be happy to do some commentating for you if you'd like.
Yeah.
So what in year 8, what are some of the major challenges or obstacles or opportunities that you think you have to overcome or get to ensure the long-term health of the league?
Relevance. That's the biggest. And that covers so much. And, you could get into well, we got to get more media coverage. We got to get more TV, more marketing, more social media. We need to have people in your office at the water cooler saying, hey, did you see that Warriors game? What was going on with that lineup last night? Why were they 3 of 14? Why were they, but that's the stuff that we commonly take for granted, I think, in our ecosystem, is that sports is a part of the day-to-day. It's a part of the water cooler life. It's a part of the, workplace. It's a part of our families. It's an opportunity for people to build memories with mom and dad, aunt and uncles, grandma and grandpas. And we're still, for good or for bad, we have a rabid following. I mean, we had 4,000 people there last night, which is a great crowd, for a stadium that's kind of out in the middle of nowhere. And it was a windy night.
But
it was
the
crazy.
weather conditions were not conducive.
It was wonky. That was as windy as I've ever seen it out there. We had to take down all of our tents, all of our premium hospitality stuff. Like, we couldn't set up any of the normal stuff that we do because of the wind. It was like wind gusts of 45, 50 miles an hour at times. Anyways, point is, we've got a good, what I call the rugby echo chamber that has latched on. And a lot of our fans are actually people that have been introduced to us for the first time. They're not big rugby people per se.
Right.
And they just fall in love with it.
Yeah.
But we have yet, as a sport, and this is not just the Warriors, this is, I would say, rugby in general, has yet to penetrate the everyday relevance conversations of people in their sporting lives, or their normal lives. Like, people like yourself, take this the right way, but like, you're not waking up in the morning.
You just say no offense.
Looking for the box score of what the Warriors did.
Well, I did today. Like, I did that today. Yeah, because now I have a recent experience with the team and being right. And
we need more of those moments where people come to a game, and I've told you this before, but people come to a game 99% of the time. They'll say, I didn't know what was going on, but I loved it.
Yeah,
absolutely loved it, and I want to come back. But we're yet to get to that level of relevance in people's everyday lives where, if they've got an option to go to a rugby game or to a jazz game, and they've got VIP hospitality at one or the other, they're going to go to the jazz game.
Yeah.
Or the media doesn't think that, we need to be covered as on the same degree as, we still kind of languish behind high school football in a lot of ways. So we've got to do more to help us become more relevant. And, as I look at it, the biggest strategy that we've got to do that is to get people that are already kind of in this non-rugby echo chamber. But my biggest role is to be the chief evangelist of the sport and the team, and to get people like yourself and others to understand and appreciate the sport that kind of have a life over here in football or golf, if you're Tony Finau, or all these other people, and have them come and be a part of the family, come enjoy it and experience it. And, so that when time comes and people ask you, hey, you ever been to a Warriors game? Like, even just that moment of you being able to say, listen, it was fun. I didn't really quite know what was going on, but it was fun. You guys should go out sometime. Like, that makes a big difference in terms of just your everyday relevance to Joe Schmo sports fan.
Well, you just have to go.
Yeah.
I mean, and I have a follow-up question, so don't let me forget that. But you just have to go, because exactly what you're talking about has occurred to me several times a day. I went to the gym this morning. The guy who leads this class is from Ireland. I know he has a rugby background, and it's the first thing I said to him. Hey, have you been to a Warriors game? He said, yeah, I've been to a lot of Warrior games. I said, oh, there was one last night. He said, oh, there was a game last night. And all of a sudden, we're having a conversation about it. And of course, I'm saying, I can't believe how big these guys are. Yeah. So that occurs when you can get people out to the game. So I understand your relevance comment. I want to ask you this, because a lot of business owners go through this, especially business owners who are kind of in that, pre-10 year, or even, in the 10-year range of still trying to grow and and find their own relevance. If someone came to you and said, "Hey, here's $100 million," I mean, this is a question that we would face too. eHub or lots of businesses. If you had $100 million and you're the Utah Warriors, how would you spend that?
We'd get every kid in the state of Utah a rugby ball. And listen, invite them out to a clinic, invite them out to stuff. Like, I am such a believer in the sport that when kids, like you'll see in our junior warrior stuff, like we've actually provided introduction to the sport of rugby to over almost 100,000 kids in the last 3 or 4 years. Whether it's through our actual leagues or other things, we partner with Salt Lake County, kind of like a junior jazz type concept. We do pregame clinics, we do all sorts of stuff, but we're limited in terms of how expansive we can make it. And, sometimes just, you've got to let the grassroots community also control and manage that. You can't control everything. But if I could help the grassroots community and I could help, grow the game, I would literally have a rugby ball in every single bassinet of, Intermountain Healthcare.
Just like hospitals. They do in Australia.
I see the way kids light up. Like I'll have to show you a picture later. But my nephew, he came out to one of our little junior warriors clinics, and this is the stuff that I love, that provides me the satisfaction of what it is that we're trying to do, because I'm a believer in what sport can do for communities. I'm a believer that it's probably the most powerful and impactful product that we can provide to, meaning for kids and lessons for families and communities and everything else. I think most people that have been involved in sports understand the power of what sports can do. But he came out to this clinic for the first time, and he'd never played rugby and he'd never done any of this sort of stuff. But, these little clinics, what our staff do, and, we have some of our current players that help with this as well. They just let them play like sharks and minnows and games, but they're carrying a rugby ball, or they're running and grabbing a rugby ball, or they're passing a rugby ball, and they're just doing little things that they're not necessarily rugby skills. Like this kid I think he was 3 or 4 at the time. Like the rugby ball was actually, 3/4 of his size, and he's carrying it. But like, there's this picture I've got of him, and he's got his hat down to his eyes. And he's carrying this rugby ball like this, and he's just laughing and giggling like he's the happiest kid in the world. And I see that all the time with these kids. And if we could, not only from a community impact perspective and, leaving Utah better than when we found it, I believe that, kids will benefit from the sport of rugby. But there's the commercial end of it as well, that if more kids are playing rugby, mom and dad are going to come along. Kids are going to want more jerseys and, yada, yada, yada. But I'm a believer enough in the sport itself that it could have positive, significant impacts, especially for our kids in today's day and age. Yeah.
And I don't know if this is a rugby league thing or if it's a Utah Warriors thing, but you have a set of core values.
Yeah.
The Warriors has a set of core values. I think this is very relevant to the corporate world as well. Do you want to talk about that and why that's meaningful?
Yeah. I mean, when we were looking at branding and the Warriors and the ethos and, the connection of the sport here in the state of Utah, not only did we want something that was meaningful so that in 30, 40 years, when someone said X, that meant something. We kind of talk about the caretaker of the jersey. I wanted to have something that, that began to gravitate and build connection. And so for us, you'll see on all of our jerseys 4 stripes. And, when
I think is it on the side of your hat here too?
I think it might be. Sorry, I'm going to mess my stuff up.
That's here. Okay. But it's right there. 4 stripes. Yeah.
And those 4 stripes stand for our 4 core values of community, family, tradition, respect. Community and what the sport can do in terms of building a connection. We talk about not only Warriors Nation as a community, but we talk about our community and giving back to the community. Family is always going to be central to everything we do. Utah, that's one of the core values of Utah, and that's something I firmly believe in. Is family is central to everything we should be about. And And tradition, respect, rugby here in Utah has got a rich tradition, but the sport itself has power and impact with its tradition of global impact, and just the core nature of the sport itself is one of respect and one of camaraderie, like we've talked about. But yeah, community, family, tradition, respect, and everything we do is about the 4 stripes. So when guys are wearing the jersey, they're wearing the 4 stripes. They're wearing our core values on their jersey. Mm-hmm. They're representing what we believe is the central identity of what it means to be, we talk about it often of being Utah built. It doesn't matter where you come from. You could be from Ireland, you could be from Tonga, you could be from, West Valley. If you adhere to the 4 stripes, the core values of what it is that we're trying to do, you're Utah built. That's what it means to be a part of the Warriors.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. I love that. One last question. What are you most optimistic about with the league and with the Warriors?
2031 is the U.S. World Cup. So Major League Soccer started the year after, if you recall, the 95 Soccer World Cup. Mm-hmm. We actually have the inverse opportunity. We've been around for 8 years. We've got about 6 or 7 more years before the first U.S. Soil Rugby World Cup. It is the 3rd largest sporting event in the world, behind the Olympics and the Soccer World Cup. Well, Soccer World Cup and the Olympics. It is a massive, massive event. I think they had over 3 million people attend games in France in the last World Cup in 2023. France won the World Cup. And it's just humongous. World Rugby is looking to utilize the Rugby World Cup in 2031 on American soil as them kind of planting that flag saying, we're here. Mm-hmm. And this is a part of the American sports ecosystem. So for me, we've seen a lot of energy and excitement and interest as that begins to build. World Rugby, the international governing body for the sport, kind of like FIFA, they're going to be investing tons of money to help with that runway and building the grassroots of the game here in the United States. We've actually already had meetings here with a lot of the stadium and facility holders and owners to have events here in Utah to make sure that Utah is a part of that conversation. So for me, it's happening. It may not necessarily be front and center to what people are paying attention to, but rugby is kind of quietly, making some inroads. And then I think 2031 it's going to be here before we know it. And it's going to be its coming out party. And it's going to be likely the most commercially successful Rugby World Cup that World Rugby's ever seen.
Wow. Yeah. Are we going to have an opportunity to see some of the teams from overseas prior to that? Are they planning on any tours?
Well, so yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. Thank you for that softball question. I don't know if you meant to do that. If you were, I'll have to.
I don't even know when I do it. I mean, it's just comes so natural.
No, the savvy media guy over here, Frank Dolce.
Yeah.
The Pacific Nations Cup is coming to Utah at America First Field on September 20th. And the Pacific Nations Cup, for context, is like the big hemispheric championship for the national teams from kind of the Asia Pacific Rim in the U.S., North America. So U.S., Canada, Tonga, Fiji, Samoa, and Japan play in the Pacific Nations Cup. And so they play a little round robin, 2 games, and then they do a semifinal and a final. And they're doing the finals here. So you'll have first and second championship, and then you'll have third and fourth playing here at AFF. But the cool thing about it is this year is that because this year is a World Cup qualifying year, they're using the Pacific Nations Cup as the qualifier. So if you make the finals, you've qualified. So everybody's going to be competing in their pool rounds, and then when they get to, because if you finish first versus fourth, that'll determine if you're this seed or that seed inside of the Rugby World Cup going into 2027. Mm-hmm. So it's going to be a big, big deal. Those national teams, like Japan's really, really good. They're historically one of the top teams in that Pacific Nations Cup ecosystem. Fiji's really good. America's getting better. Canada's kind of been struggling a little bit, but you got Tonga and Samoa who have strong roots here. I mean, we had the press conference the other day. Sorry, I'm kind of rambling here, but it was such a cool moment. We had this majestic girls high school team come and do a ceremonial welcome. They basically sang a song, but it was a Tongan hymn, and it was a song that just like we could have ended the press conference after they sang that song. It was one of those more powerful moments where you could see the rugby community that was there, Polynesian and Caucasian community, but especially the Polynesian community that was there. Rugby's their sport. Even Kalani was there, and he had kind of said, I played a little bit with the Provo Steelers and trained with them, and it's part of their identity and who they are. So it's pretty impactful to see, some of these grown men that were literally having tears come to their eyes, seeing that moment, knowing that this tournament that's their sport with their country is going to be coming to their backyard.
Well, I love that. And I love the future of rugby here in the state and in the U.S. It's a great game, and being able to witness the game live, up close and personal, it does change your perspective on it. Yeah. Here's your curveball question, actually. I just thought of it. So Kalani Sitake played fullback in college.
Yeah. What would he play in rugby?
You got it.
I think he'd probably be a really, really like an international caliber prop, which is kind of like an offensive or defensive lineman. Because at the international level, they kind of need to be like linebackers. They need to be mobile, but they also need to, like, come scrum time, they've got to be able to push some people around. They got to, really, muscle up. So having, a decent Kalani, don't get mad at me here, but, having a decent, low center of gravity. I've got one myself, so I can appreciate it. Having a good low center of gravity and some good, girth behind that low center of gravity, he'd do well.
I've often said that Kalani Sitake has a low center of gravity. I've made that comment.
Well, listen, it's one of the only talents that I've provided my daughter in soccer. It's not necessarily height. I've just, when parents come up to me and they say, "Hey, your daughter's doing really good at soccer," I say, "Well, she's got a good low center of gravity. She can really get in there and muscle up on some of these soccer kids."
You don't overlook the low center of gravity, the importance of the
she's not short. She's got a good low center of gravity. So, no, I think Kalani could actually be really good. He could be a really good prop. If not that, he would be a really good flanker. So he'd be in the forwards for sure. And I think he'd be pretty amazing at that.
Yeah, I mean, we have coaches on both sides here. Kalani messed around with rugby a little bit. I could see how he would be very good. Of course, Utah's defensive coordinator, Morgan Scalley, is very successful in the rugby world and at Highland and all of that. So there's this great foundation of rugby in the state of Utah. And if we could get the rest of the U.S. to catch on, I think.
Well, and even here in Utah, like it's the most successful sport that people don't really know about.
Yeah.
It really is. Like, and like Morgan came out to help us with our we had a new office space that we built that you came to, and he came and helped us with the launch of that. And it was like, that guy is amazing. Like, they're going to do some pretty amazing thing, when he finally gets his chance and, to stand in the sun, so to speak. But like, guys like Morgan, guys like Kalani, a lot of these people that have been in and around rugby, there's a lot of them. In the business world, in the sports world, and Utah arguably has the most successful piece of that, because we've had 38 national champions that have come out of the state of Utah in 39 years. High school, club, collegiate. So it's pretty impressive. It's the most successful sport here in Utah that nobody knows about.
Well, let's make people know about it.
Yeah,
let's get some people involved. Kimball Kjar, thank you so
Thank you.
much.
This has been fun.
You've been so great. Hope we'll, you know what? Let's have you come back again. We'll get an update on the team and on the state of rugby. And how did people get to the games? Where can we find out more about the Warriors?
WarriorsRugby.com. That's our website. All the information there for tickets and everything. We've got 2 games left on March 30th, which is a Friday night, and then June 7th. Yeah,
May 30th.
Yeah, thank you.
You got it.
May 30th. I've got all my dates and months.
I know. It's a couple dings playing rugby. I mean, you get your dates mixed up. That's what.
There's stories there I could tell you about, but we're running out of time here. I've rambled too much. But yeah, May 30th, Friday, and then the last regular season game is June 7th. But hopefully we're sitting first in the league and in the Western Conference right now, even though we lost last night. Mm-hmm. We're still in first, and hopefully we have number 1 seed or number 2 seed, which gives us at least one home playoff round June 14th, and yada yada yada. So hopefully we can keep this thing rolling, get our guys healthy, and get things going so we can bring back a championship on June 28th.
Let's go, Utah Warriors.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Appreciate it. Come back and see us again.
This has been fun.
Thank you for listening to the Know Your Ship podcast presented by eHub. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a review.